Welcome to Square Notes, the Sacred Music Podcast. Your chance to learn about the teachings of the Catholic Church on sacred music, both in theory and practice. Through interviews, discussions, and music, your hearts and minds will be lifted up and better understand what it means to sing the praise of His glory. And now, your host, Dr. Jennifer Donaldson-Nowicka.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to Square Notes, the Sacred Music Podcast. Our guest today is one of our favorites. Dr. William Mahrt of Stanford University joins us to discuss the role of the divine office in the mediation of time. We touch on the structure of the office throughout the day, its relationship to light and darkness, the various and simultaneous cycles which comprise the liturgical year as a whole, and how music has a particular role in the relationship between the natural and supernatural orders. Dr. Mahrt offers us a theological and liturgical feast in the episode, and the feast will continue. If you're really interested in the music of the divine office, the other major branch of the Church's liturgy besides the Mass, you'll want to consider taking Dr. Mahrt's summer class, an advanced seminar in Gregorian chant on the chants of the divine office, offered on the afternoons of July 24th to 28th, 2023. There are in-person and online seats available for the course, which, just like our other 11 courses this summer, is offered with free tuition. More information about the course and application of the program is available on the Institute's website, catholicinstituteofsacredmusic.org. And now, on to the interview. Thanks for joining me today, Bill. It's really great to have you back on the show.
Glad to be here.
This summer, July 24th through the 28th, you're teaching an advanced chant seminar on the chants of the divine office. And so our topic today is the way that the Church's liturgy, especially the divine office, mediates time for the Christian. So could we start perhaps with a big theological concept? And that is the difference between a natural sense of time and a supernatural sense of time. And perhaps we could describe this as the way that humans experience time versus how God created and, I guess, analogically experiences time. What are your thoughts on this? Or do you have some favorite theologians that you like to share insights about this issue?
Well, one of the funniest discussions is given by St. Augustine in the Confessions. And he says, you ask, what was God doing before he created the world? And the answer is, it's the wrong question.
Yes.
He wasn't doing before he created the world. He is eternal. And the existence of time is, in fact, his own creation. So that time is then something that we receive from him as a creation, just as we receive all of creation. And the scholastics talked about time as the measure of motion, so that time is, in fact, the measure of those things which change. And that's something that I think is valuable in looking at the liturgy. I always think of Mircea Eliade in discussing the sacred, says that time is not homologous. That is, the points of time are differentiated, and time differs from time to time, from point to point. And I think that's a crucial aspect of the liturgy, that we think of the day and the year and the month and the week. All of those elements of time are differentiated. They have high points and low points. They have bright points and dark points. Their experience is something that gives our life variety and interest. And then when it comes to the sacred, the liturgy builds upon all of those elements of time that are significant. And we can go into the elements of time, if you like, the year, the day, the month, the week, those things, the seasons. All of those are points of differentiation that are articulated by music that is differentiated.
Right. This is such a profound message for the modern world that I think perhaps feels time as meaningless or just with a sense of dread and nihilism.
Yeah, that's right. But you see, if you observe anything of the divine office, and as lay people, we probably hardly any of us can observe the entire divine office, except maybe on one day or another. I've just come back from St. Michael's Abbey in Southern California, where I and a friend every year go down for the Feast of St. Joseph and attend the entire day of the divine office, sung by 70 Norbertine clerics who sing beautifully and who are dedicated to the liturgy. But as lay people, the memory of that comes back at points in the day. And in the meantime, we can, in fact, say some of the divine office or even sing some of it. My own church choir has sung Vespers Sunday afternoons since 1974. We had started it, and I was, a pokey-nosed musicologist who was just kind of thinking, what is Vespers and why don't we see what it's like? And so we sang it for 3 or 4 weeks, and I thought, that's fine. I've now learned a little bit about Vespers. Thank you very much. And so in maybe 3 or 4 weeks, somebody said, when are we going to sing Vespers again? And so we did it once more, and then pretty soon the same person said, when are we going to sing Vespers again? And I said, well, if you want, we can sing it every Sunday. I thought, it's almost the same every Sunday. The one thing that differs on the Sunday Vespers is the antiphon to the Magnificat and the tone for the Magnificat, but otherwise, and the collect, but otherwise, it's the same each Sunday. I thought these musicians won't want to come back to just do the same thing over and over again. Sure they do. That's part of the beauty of it. And so we have sung Vespers ever since. It's a small group, but that's when I travel, I miss Sunday Vespers. Yeah. Just the divine office can be sung by and you can sing it for yourself. I know a scholar in Switzerland who is Italian. And so he is following the old Roman office. He gets up at 5 o'clock in the morning in his kitchen and sings by himself the entire matins of the old Roman office daily. Then he goes to work and does his scholarship. Well, we could make better use of our time. I think we could scarcely make better use of our time than to do things like that.
Yeah. It's such a spiritual treasure. I'm reminded of that chapter in Martin Bosbach's The Heresy of Formlessness, where he talks about Foncambeau and his visit to Foncambeau and the meaningfulness of everything. With a structure like that, it affects our own sense of time. You were talking a lot about that it isn't homologous, that we experience it in different ways, and to sacralize it, to put it in conspectu Dei.
Yes.
Is essentially what it does. So could you talk a little bit about the structure of the divine office throughout one particular day? What are the traditional hours of the office?
Sure. The key elements, as I see it, in the divine office for the day is those things which articulate the day. Dawn and sunset, that is to say, lauds at dawn and vespers at sunset. And both of those offices are substantial offices. They take half an hour or a little bit longer to sing if you're just singing in chant. And then you have during the day, you have the little hours, that is to say, they follow the Roman nomenclature of dividing the day into 4 parts: prime, terce, sext, and none, the first, the third, the 6th, and the 9th hours. And there is a brief service at each of those times in the day. Then at nightfall is Compline, and in the middle of the night, by old monastic standards, is Matins. And Matins is something else again. I don't know very many places that sing the entire matins. It is very complex. It consists of the invitatory psalm, which is sung responsorially, so it takes a while to sing it, a hymn, and then 3 nocturnes. Each nocturne consists of 3 psalms with antiphons and 3 lessons with responsories. So you have 9 psalms and antiphons and 9 lessons with responsories. And the interesting thing about the lessons with responsories that has been forgotten in the construction of the new office is that you have the 3 lessons are in fact segments of the same lesson. And generally speaking, the 3rd lesson is a patristic homily on the gospel of the Mass of the day. But what happens is the lesson itself is divided into 3 parts. You sing just a modest portion of the lesson, and then you sing a long responsory as a meditation on it.
Right. It's so conducive to contemplative life and Lectio Divina. Yeah.
Exactly. And then the next segment, another responsory, and the next segment, and an even more elaborate responsory. So that there is a meditative character. As you say, it's like Lectio Divina, but there's a meditative character to the matins that is just phenomenal. And you look at the heritage that we have from the Middle Ages, the number of responsories for matins is enormous. We haven't had a publication of the responsories for matins until very recently, when a very enterprising young man in Germany, using a computer, edited the whole thing and published it. And it's a book that is about 2 inches thick. It's enormous. And it is a treasure of chants that would ordinarily have been sung in relationship to the matins, to the lessons of matins. The thing is, the ideal structure of the day that we're talking about is probably what would have been sung, or what is in fact occasionally sung, in a monastery, where their whole day is structured by the divine office principally.
Right. In terms of what it means, this spiritual meaning, we're talking about the meaningfulness of time and how the office mediates that for us. So what is the spiritual focus of something like lauds versus prime versus terce versus known versus vespers, matins? They have a sort of emphasis and spiritual disposition that reflects where they come in the day and their relationship to the light.
That's right. In relation to the light is very crucial, because you do have a rubric from the Middle Ages. I don't know how widely it was observed or even known, but it is mentioned in the commentaries, in the histories of the office, that you sing matins in the middle of the night. One calculates maybe 2 o'clock in the morning, but I think in any given place it was quite different.
Well, especially if they're going according to the solar horarium, where it changes.
It changes anyway, because the length of the night differs. But the other question then is, when do you start? How do you know when to start? And one of the things that they did was to burn a candle. And when the candle burned out, then it was time to start. And picked a candle that was going to burn the right length of time. But the thing about lauds is that if you're singing matins and the sunrise occurs, you break off matins and begin lauds immediately. So that lauds is, in fact, a direct response to the sunrise. And we have a nice little thing in Dante, where Dante mentions that suddenly, upon the appearance of the sun, the birds break out in song as if they were singing lauds. It's quite wonderful. But then the texts for lauds are texts that are vivid responses to the beauty of nature and to all the phenomena of the physical world that are beautiful.
Right. And the proper response is to laud our Lord, to praise him for those
Yes,
things.
that's right. Yes, yeah. And I can remember having gone to San Francisco and having helped out with a study week in which we sang several of the hours of the office in the course of the day. And getting up in the morning at 7 o'clock, walking out. We were in a guest house and then the chapel, this very beautiful Carmelite chapel, was down the street. We had to walk down the street to get into the chapel. And I was absolutely taken by the fact that in San Francisco, every morning is different. That sometimes the sun is just shining brightly. Sometimes it's raining. Sometimes there is this fog. And sometimes there is just a torrent of clouds traveling across the sky. I was never so taken by the phenomena of nature, and then having to go immediately to sing lauds was something quite wonderful. So the lauds is then something very, very wonderful about the phenomena of nature. Vespers is in a way just the opposite. Vespers is at the end of the day when the sunset occurs. And you have this wonderful hymn. Well, you have the hymns of Vespers for the week by St. Gregory the Great, which are each day focused upon the days of creation. And so the Vespers of Sunday focuses upon the creation of light, which then has a double meaning. Sunday is the day of the creation of light, but Vespers is the time when you need to light the candles in order to provide for a substitute of the natural light that is now setting. And you have, in fact, in the hymn for Vespers on Sundays, the text, Lucis crater optime lucem dierum proferens, primordiis lucis nove mundi parans originem, qui mane junctum vespere diem vocare precipis, illabitur tetrum chaos audi preces completibus. So, one optimal creator of the light, bringing forth the light of day, and in the beginnings of light, you created the beginning of the world, who then command that morning joined to night be called the day. Suddenly, foul chaos begins to fall. We pray with tears that you hear us. There's something of nature that we have to almost just imagine, because with electric lights, there isn't any foul chaos anymore.
Yeah, but this is a really important point too, right? The mastery of human experience over nature and the invention of artificial illumination. I think modern people feel in a very keen way the divorce that we experience from nature, and I think this is at the spiritual longings of so many people who are really conscientious about all things green and whatnot. I think there is a spiritual yearning for the connectedness to nature that really is, again, mediated in a very concrete way through the divine office's experience of time and the relationship of time to light and how that affects our perception. And so if our perception is always distorted by the artificial light, we can lose that connection. This is really a way of getting back to nature. This is like the green movement within the church celebration of the office.
Well, then there's Compline, and Compline comes at nightfall. At the time of Vespers, you still have twilight, but when the twilight ceases, that's the beginning of Compline. And Compline is the completing of the day, and it is a point at which one reflects upon the entire day, including making a confession of sins and then speaking of the end of light. And the hymn for Compline is quite wonderful. Te lucis ante terminum, thou who before the end of light. The interesting thing about Compline is that at the end of a day, it's been a busy day of singing a lot of offices. It started with the most substantial of all offices, matins, which is a real test of concentration and of prayer. So by the end of the day, you're a little bit exhausted. Compline does not change from day to day. It's the same Compline each day. And that means that it's very easy, at least in a monastic circumstance, to sing it from memory. So that you don't even need to read from a book. You can just sing it from memory. And I can recall many monks that I have known have done that. There's a beauty about a prayer that you know so well that you can almost spontaneously say it. Certainly the psalms and the responsories of matins require much more attention and, at least in a modern context, reading of the things. Although Amilarius of Metz is quoted as having said that for matins, you can only light 2 candles on the altar. That means you don't have candles to read anything. And the only reason for lighting another candle is if nobody can remember what comes next.
Yes.
So, I mean, imagine singing the entire matins.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Well, you certainly would have had to memorize the Psalter.
Mm-hmm.
That was something that was very well known and very much a practice.
Mm-hmm.
So, and in fact, one of the exercises that some monks were required to do was to say the whole Psalter every day, to say it, which was an exercise of memorization, really, so that they would have each psalm ready when it was time to sing it. But the Compline is then something that is a very beautiful contrast with the matins.
And could you also speak a little bit? You mentioned this, the examination of conscience at Compline. There are moments of those preparation for a sort of spiritual battle with sin throughout the day, and then points of reflection in the minor hours too, right?
In Prime, for instance, there's also the Confiteor in Prime, as there is in Compline. And the nice thing also that people don't realize most often is that in Compline, you say, let's see, it starts with a lesson. And the history of that lesson is interesting, but it starts with a lesson, and then it says, Pater Noster, all together in silence. And then after that, so you say the Lord's Prayer silently. Then after that comes Confiteor. My theory about that is that in the Middle Ages, particularly, you didn't have a stopwatch. How you time things is to say a prayer. So recipe books will say, throw in a cup of rice and stir for the time of 3 misereres. So I think that this is a timing of the examination of conscience.
Yeah.
And you have that at the end of Vespers as well. You say the Lord's Prayer, the Hail Mary, and the Apostles' Creed. St. Benedict in the Rule says there should be some silent prayer at the end of Vespers, but it should not be too long so that no monk thinks that he should show off by praying longer than everybody.
He understood human nature so well.
So here is a timing of the silent prayer. And we've done that with our Vespers. We make a little procession to the Lady Altar at the end of the Vespers, and then we come back to the altar and say another prayer, and then this silence. And our officiant, the cleric who celebrated the Mass, the office for us, who led the office for us, said to me, "This is one of my favorite times in the whole day, this moment of silence at the end of Vespers." It's amazing to think. And, as long as one person says the Lord's Prayer, the Hail Mary, and the Apostles' Creed, then the rest can reflect and meditate. And I think that's the purpose of it.
Yeah.
Pray in whatever fashion is most suitable for you.
Yeah. Bill, could we expand our time frame here? Now, we've talked a little bit about one day, but let's talk about the calendar year. Could you talk a little bit about how there are, there are a couple main poles of the liturgical year that everyone obviously knows, Easter and Christmas, but there are other sorts of cycles throughout the year that form the calendar year as well.
Of course, the Christmas cycle is interesting because it starts with March 25th, the Annunciation. And so 9 months later, on the human gestation period, comes Christmas Day. And this then doesn't happen. It was really chosen to do this, that it falls upon the spring equinox and the vernal equinox, and then the winter solstice. So the two temporal points of change of time in the natural order that then are sanctified by the supernatural events that are commemorated at that time. And you have on each of these points, both Christmas and Easter, you have seasons of preparation and of celebration, so that historically speaking, Advent was a season of 40 days. Very early on, it was limited, but down to just the 4 Sundays. But 40 days. The Christmas season traditionally lasted until purification, February 2nd, 40 days after Christmas. And then 40 days before Easter, not counting the Sundays, is Lent, which is a preparation for Easter. And then 40 days after Easter is Ascension, which is already, just as Lent is 40 days because Christ fasted in the desert for 40 days. So Ascension is 40 days after Easter, because the Gospel, or the Acts of the Apostles, maybe tells us that the Ascension took place 40 days after Easter. And then you have the hyper 40 days, which is 50. And the Feast of Pentecost is 50 days after Easter. But that one is interesting because it actually goes back to the Jewish calendar. And the whole narration of the story of Pentecost was that they gathered together to celebrate the Jewish Feast of Pentecost. And then came the Holy Spirit. And interestingly, the Jewish Feast of Pentecost was celebrating the giving of the law on Mount Sinai. And then the Christian feast celebrates the coming of the Holy Spirit. So the contrast between the law and the Spirit is something that is vivid on Pentecost Sunday. And of course, then the season after Pentecost is quite a bit longer. It really follows until Advent again. But so there are those principal days. But if you look at the calendar, you see that there is a whole cycle of Marian feasts. There is the Immaculate Conception, and since my choir is the St. Anne choir, St. Anne is the mother of the Blessed Virgin. And the legend, it's not a scriptural legend, but the legend is that Anne and Joachim met at the Golden Gate, and that was the symbol of their conception of the Blessed Virgin. So there is this lovely story that pertains to the Immaculate Conception, and then 9 months later is the Nativity of the Blessed Virgin. 80 days later, it was 80 for a woman and 40 for a man, that is for a girl child and a boy child, the presentation in the temple. And the presentation in the temple for Mary is key, because the Annunciation, which then occurs later, seems to have a background of her being regularly in the temple. So the presentation is an important day. And then, of course, you have a couple of days in which Mary has such an important role. Christmas, for instance, and the stories of Christmas focus partly upon Mary, and the octave of Christmas, which is an interesting day. It is sometimes called the circumcision, and it's sometimes called the octave of Christmas. But in some of the earliest documents, it's called the Solemnity of Mary. And that is a title that has been resuscitated by the new office, by the new calendar, so that New Year's Day is now called liturgically the Solemnity of Mary. But it's always been the Solemnity of Mary in a certain sense, because the Psalms of the Divine Office were those that pertained to the offices of the Blessed Virgin. So there's that. Then there is the purification, February 2nd. And this is now in the new calendar, it's called the Presentation of the Lord. But in the old calendar, it was the purification of the Blessed Virgin. It's both. And the juxtaposition of those two events is also significant. And then comes the Annunciation. And that then constitutes a significant, perhaps the most significant feast of the Blessed Virgin of all, even though, again, it is a feast of the Lord as well. And there is, both at Christmas and at Annunciation, the link between the Marian cycle and the Christmas cycle. There are cycles of the apostles. There is a cycle of the apostles, and this stems probably from the fact that there were 12 apostles, and at one point, the apostles were identified with the signs of the zodiac. And so each apostle gets a feast day on a month. And by the Roman calendar, the beginning of a month is not the first day, but the 25th day of the previous month as we count the days. So that the calends of April would be March 25th. Is that right, calends? I'm not sure about the two.
That's right.
So in fact, that means that the most important day of the month is the 25th. Annunciation, Christmas, most apostles' feast days fall upon the 25th day of the month. So that since December 25th is already taken, St. Thomas is the 21st, and St. John the Apostle is the 27th. But in January, the 25th is the conversion of St. Paul. In February, Matthias. Nothing in March, because there again, Holy Week has sort of preempted all of the dates. April 25th, St. Mark. Saints Philip and James are in the 1st of May, or in the middle of May in the newer calendars. I don't know why they didn't get into the 25th day of the month, but there you have one that's a kind of an exception. But in June, Saints Peter and Paul, the 29th. In July, James. In August, Bartholomew. In September, Matthew. In October, Simon and Jude. And in November, Andrew's a week late. His is 30th. I suppose there may be explanations for why the slight variation in some of those days, but I don't know what it is. Right. So for the apostles, you have these recurrent apostles' days that are quite significant, and they fall on the principal day of the month.
That's great. You also talk a little bit about the cycle of the saints beyond the apostles and evangelists.
Oh yes, the saints' days are there. In the Middle Ages, there was a saints' day for absolutely every day. And the Council of Trent cut it back a little bit. But in the 19th century, they were stuffing the calendar with saints' days. So we inherited one again that was almost completely saints' days. And at the Second Vatican Council, they cut back on them again, partly because they wanted the days of Advent and the weekdays of Advent and Lent to be seasonal days rather than saints' days. But so many of the saints have significant days. For instance, John the Baptist. So John the Baptist's feast day is the summer solstice, exactly 6 months away from the birthday of Christ. And it is cited that John said, he must increase and I must decrease. And so this pertains to the duration of light on his birthday as a symbol of his role as giving way to the Lord as a preparation to him. And in some of the old calendars and in the Eastern Church, there is a feast of the conception of John the Baptist, something like the 25th of September. That day has a resonance for us in the divine office, because that's where Zachary is given the news that he will be the father of John, and he doesn't believe it, and he's struck dumb. And his speech is only resumed upon the birth of John, when they say, oh, he should be named after Zachary. And Zachary said, give me a tablet where I can write. Or he motioned to get a tablet. And he wrote, his name is John. At which point his speech was restored. And that's the reason that we have the hymn Ut Queant Loxis, the hymn for the feast of St. John the Baptist, which is the singer's hymn, that our lips may be loosened to sing thy praise. So there's a beautiful set of days pertaining to St. John the Baptist. Important saints fall in various places. The location of the saint's day is normally what's called his heavenly birthday, the day that he died and went to heaven, except for 3 nativities. We celebrate the nativity of the Lord, and we also celebrate the nativity of the Blessed Virgin, because she was conceived in grace, and so was born already in grace. St. John the Baptist was also believed to have been born in grace, because when at the visitation Mary met with Elizabeth, the child John leapt in the womb of Elizabeth. And this has always been taken to be the time at which John was cleansed of original sin and therefore was born in grace. And so the birthday of John the Baptist is nativity, as distinct from any apostle.
I'm so reminded, Bill, I think I keep coming back to the longings of the modern human heart, these longings for identity, for belonging. And I just think about like all the things that you've been talking about, the structure of one day, the structure of a year, and these sort of overlapping cycles, that there are different things that you can allow yourself to focus on, but yet they all interact in a sort of cosmological sense, a symphonic sense, or almost like a polyphony of time, which has harmonies and coincidences, and you can travel along one line or another, and it gives a sense of meaningfulness to time that has a particular way of embedding itself in a person's identity, which I think is a real spiritual need. And of course, there's two, and this is the last question I'd like to pose to you today. We talked about the mediation of time mostly through the different hours and through the liturgical year. There's also the mediation of time through music itself.
Yes.
That is different from how we experience the liturgy if it is simply spoken. That aspect of speaking, because it's common to the everyday, seems less capable of bringing us in conspectu Dei, as we've been talking about, of placing us in the presence of God. Whereas music is controlling that time, controlling our perception and experience of that time. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, there's a wonderful statement in Cardinal Ratzinger's The Spirit of the Liturgy. At the beginning of his chapter on music and liturgy, he says, when man comes into contact with God, mere speech is not enough. Areas of his existence are awakened that spontaneously turn into song. Indeed, man's own being is insufficient for what he has to express, and so he invites the whole of creation to become a song with him. And this is part of Benedict's notion that Christ, the Logos, as a creator of the order of the world, and order means in Greek cosmos, so that the things which are cosmological refer to the order of creation. And it's an absolutely wonderful thing to think that every phenomenon of creation is ordered. And modern mentality would say, oh, it's all a phenomenon of accident.
Or something created by one's own mind and perception.
Yeah, but I mean, how can I influence the order of the planets? By whatever I do in my mind. And the nice thing is that you look at the universe and we're discovering yet more and more galaxies. The thing is absolutely immense. And yet it's all moving in an orderly fashion. And you look at the composition of the atom, and we discover more and more smaller and smaller particles. The order of the atom itself is immense and complex. And you look at DNA. And I have just watched an interview program, Uncommon Knowledge, of 3 scientists who say the complexity of what we see as phenomena in nature is far too great for it to have happened by evolution. And so they are taking a stand that the order of creation demonstrates a creator. And then Benedict's notion is, of course, the order of creation is symbolized by music. And when we make ordered music, we are calling upon the order and purpose of all of creation. And whenever we sing, we are linking into all of the singing that has been done, commemorates the order of creation. And that's not only just by the medieval view, the order of the planets, but by a more patristic view, the order of the angels. So that the angels singing in heaven create a kind of music that they add to our singing of the Sanctus. When we sing the Sanctus in the Mass, we are calling upon the angels to sing with us, to praise the God of creation, and to prepare us for his descent upon the altar.
Yeah. Well, Bill, your knowledge about these things is quite symphonic, I have to say. Especially bringing all these things together. And I think our listeners always benefit from your insights. So if they want to learn more about the actual chants of the divine office that actually actuate these things that we were talking about, they'll just have to sign up for your course this summer, July 24th through the 28th in the afternoons.
Well, and the thing is, there's no end of the beauty of the music of the divine office and of the differentiation of parts and of the beauty that is created by singing different kinds of music.
Yep. Yeah. A symphony indeed.
Yep.
Thank you so much, Bill.
Pleasure.
We hope you've enjoyed listening to Square Notes, the Sacred Music Podcast. with Dr. Jennifer Donaldson-Nowicka. For more information about this episode, sacred music resources, or upcoming events, visit our website at sacredmusicpodcast.com. You can subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, or your favorite podcast app. If you enjoy our podcast, please write us a review on iTunes. This improves our iTunes ranking and helps others find out about the podcast. The music you heard at the beginning of this episode is Hec Dies by William Byrd, sung by the London Oratory's Schola Cantorum Boys Choir, directed by Charles Cole from the CD Sacred Treasures of England. The music at the conclusion of this podcast is from the Prelude and Fugue in G Major, BWV 550 by Johann Sebastian Bach, performed by Jennifer Donaldson-Nowicka. We look forward to having you join us next time, and until then, may we sing the praise of His glory.